They thought he was just another slow, forgetful old man, until they almost killed him, and laughed. It happened in under 10 seconds, a stumble, a horn, a car swerving by inches, and 3 boys laughing like gods of the street, careless, cruel, untouchable. But in that exact moment, sitting quietly on the edge of the curb, brushing the dirt from his sleeves, was a man with a past so deep, even the earth had once tried to bury him. They used to call him Gunny. 3 near deaths, 1 mistaken burial. Yet today, all they saw was an old man crossing the street too slow for their taste. Let's go back, just 5 minutes earlier. It was a morning painted in soft tones. Sunlight brushed over graffiti walls. Dust hovered in golden air. The city hadn't woken up fully. Everything felt like it was holding its breath. James Wallace stepped out from a brick apartment building where the intercom had long since stopped working. His gait was steady, not slow, deliberate. His cane hit pavement like a metronome, each step echoing discipline. He wore a long navy coat frayed slightly at the cuffs but clean. His boots, black leather, marine issue, were polished to a dull shine. Pinned above his heart was a faded insignia, the eagle, globe, and anchor, Semper Fi. He walked the same path every day, 7:12 a.m., sharp, not because he had nowhere else to be, but because this was the rhythm that kept the ghosts at bay. The bodega owner saw him first, nodded, no words, just the same ritual: coffee, paper, cash. The kind of transaction that needed no noise. But today was different. Somewhere in this city, 5 men were eating breakfast. They were ex-Marines, living civilian lives, quiet lives, but each of them knew if the phone buzzed, 1 text, 1 call, they would answer, and they would come. That call hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. Across the street, 3 boys loitered with the kind of posture that screamed boredom and bravado. Teenagers, maybe 16. One had a speaker blaring drill beats. Another was already filming something, flicking through clips for the next post. All of them looked up at the same time and saw him. "He gonna take a year just to cross," one snorted. The second one smirked. "Might need help, Grandpa." They started toward him. One exaggerated his limp, dragging a leg like a cartoon zombie. Then, suddenly, cruelly, one gave a shove. Wallace was already halfway into the crosswalk. The push sent him forward. A car appeared, too fast. A honk split the air. Tires screamed. The driver jerked the wheel. Wallace missed death by a heartbeat. The car skidded sideways and stalled, smoke rising from rubber. He didn't fall. He didn't curse. He turned. Behind him, the boys erupted into laughter. One held up his phone. "Yo, this is gold!" he cackled. Wallace adjusted his coat with slow fingers, looked directly at them, not with fear, not even with anger, just something they didn't understand, something old, something solid. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone so old it looked like it belonged. In a museum flip speed dial, 1 number. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Wallace," he said calmly. "Belmont and 5th, no weapons, civilian disturbance, send presents, Semper Fi. No drama, no panic, just duty." He hung up, sat down on the bench by the lamppost, crossed one leg over the other, watched the sky. The boys were still laughing, but something in their sound had started to falter. They didn't know it yet. But in 19 minutes, their entire world would change. The video hit Instagram before Wallace had even finished his coffee. A shaky vertical frame, 3 boys laughing, an old man shoved, a car swerving, captioned, "Old dude almost got wrecked, twice too slow, chai grandpa drills." The comments, "Game fast, LMFAO savage, Darwin almost did his thing lol, wait, is he okay?" A few questioned it. Most didn't care. Views piled up, but one viewer did more than watch. He sat in a garage across town polishing the tailgate of his truck when his phone buzzed. No name, just a number. A number tied to a voice he hadn't heard in 12 years. He didn't hesitate. "On my way," he said out loud, even though no one was there. Within 10 minutes, 4 other men were also moving. One left his barber shop with the clippers still running. Another paused his breakfast mid-bite. slid his plate toward his stunned daughter, and walked out without a word. They didn't need instructions, just coordinates. Back in the alley behind the liquor store, the boys were still buzzing with energy. Not the good kind, the cocky sugar rush kind that comes from getting away with something. "Dude," the tallest one said, "did you see his face? Bro looked like he time-traveled from 1942. They laughed again. One passed a vape, another passed a phone. The air smelled like sweat, asphalt, and cheap cologne. That's when the silence hit. It didn't creep, it fell. The music died first. Then came the sense, subtle at first, that something was watching. The first Marine stepped into the alley like a shadow-breaking form. Mid-30s, clean fade, black t-shirt stretched across a frame that still carried war in every line. No words, just presence. The boys froze. Then a second figure appeared at the far end, another at the side gate, and two more behind the fence. They didn't rush, didn't even raise their voices. They simply stood, perfectly still, trapped, not by weapons, but by history. What the hell? One of the boys muttered, backing into a wall. The man in front, Corporal Reyes, though no name was given, took a step forward. "You boys like push-ups?" No response. Another step. "Good, because where I come from, you show disrespect, you. Work it off." Still no reaction. Then, louder. "Down!" The leader of the group, Dre, tried to puff his chest. "Man, y'all think you're scaring somebody?" "Down." The voice cracked through the alley like gunfire. Years of drill, condensed into one command. And instinct. Some ancient memory buried in the DNA of youth made them drop. Push-ups. Knees shaking. Backs sagging. "Back straight," snapped a voice from the gate. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm took over. They weren't being punished. They were being trained. No shouting, no violence. Just relentless correction. One boy faltered. A hand reached out, not to hit, but to lift. "Again, you can," Dre gasped. "We didn't even do anything that bad." A Marine stepped forward. Calm, stern. "You humiliated a veteran, laughed when he could have died. That's not a prank. That's cowardice." Silence again. Wallace stood at the alley's edge now, hands folded behind his back. He didn't say a word, but the way the Marines nodded to him said everything. This wasn't a revenge mission. This was a ritual. 20 minutes passed. The boys were soaked in sweat, lungs burning, faces pale. But none of them had been hit. None had been screamed at, only taught. Finally, Corporal Reyes turned. "Stand." The boys rose slowly. One Marine barked, "Eyes front." They snapped to attention, shaky, untrained, but obeying. Reyes pointed to the end of the alley. "You leave here. You don't talk, you think." He turned toward Wallace. "Training complete, Gunnery Sergeant." Wallace gave a small nod, just once. And in that single movement, the entire weight of what had just occurred sank into the ground beneath them. As the boys stumbled back onto the sidewalk, the city looked different, sharper, quieter. The people passing them didn't know what had happened, but they looked at the boys' sweat-soaked shirts and stunned faces and moved aside, not out of fear, out of something else, respect, pity, recognition. Dre didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because for the first time in his life words felt inadequate. He had never met a Marine before today. Now 5 of them had looked him in the eyes and expected better, and that feeling wouldn't go away. Something in Dre broke that day, but it didn't break like glass. It broke like a fever. The sweat had dried, the push-ups were over, but the shaking didn't stop. He sat alone that night, staring at the blue light of his phone, the screen still, open to his most recent post, now well past 100,000 views. But the laughter in the comments didn't feel sweet anymore. It curdled in his stomach. He tried watching it again. Couldn't. He swiped to the part where Wallace stood, silent, still, that stare, and paused it. Why did it feel like he was the one being watched? Elsewhere, the video had taken a second life. It made its way onto Twitter, then to a local news subreddit. Marine vet with a following of 20,000 reposted it with a caption, "They picked the wrong grandfather. That man's name is James Wallace. Gunnery Sergeant, Purple Heart, survived 3 wars, never asked for anything, never stopped serving." The replies came in waves. "We don't deserve men like him. I served under Wallace. He saved my life in Najaf. Never forgot his eyes. Is there a way to thank him? Where does he live?" It wasn't viral in the usual sense. It was deeper. It resonated like a pulse under the skin of a restless city. Dre didn't sleep that night. By morning, he had watched interviews with Marines, read old articles about boot camp, even Googled James Wallace Marine history. There wasn't much, just a few faded mentions in archived military newsletters, but it was enough. He saw a picture. Same face, younger eyes, same stillness. He sat back, breath shallow. He had mocked that man. No, worse. He had nearly killed him, and the man hadn't even raised a hand. Wallace, meanwhile, sat as he always did on the bench by the lamppost, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. People stopped more often now. Quiet greetings, nods. A few teenagers, unsure of how to begin, sat a bench away, just to be near him. As if something about his presence slowed their chaos. He never lectured, but one by one they felt the pull to ask, "Were you really a Marine? Did you kill people? Do you ever get scared?" Wallace answered only when it mattered. "Courage isn't not being scared, it's moving anyway. Respect isn't earned by being loud, it's what you protect when no one's looking. You boys think I'm old. You don't know what it means to endure." They listened, because silence from a man like that felt louder than a stadium full of noise. On the 4th day, Dre returned. He stood across the street for 10 minutes before crossing. Wallace didn't look up, even as the boy sat beside him. No apology came, just breath. Then, "Finally, I Googled you." Wallace said nothing. "I didn't know, I didn't get it, not till they showed up. Those guys." He trailed off. Wallace turned, slowly. "They weren't there to hurt you." Dre nodded. "I know." Another silence. Then, "Why? Didn't you press charges?" Wallace leaned back, looked toward the clouds. "Because I saw who you could be, not who you were. That landed. It didn't smack. It sank." The days bled into weeks. Dre kept coming back. He didn't tell his friends. He didn't post it. These visits weren't for show. He listened more than he spoke. Sometimes they just sat. Sometimes, Wallace shared. The jungles, the blood, the unbearable quiet that followed the screams, the comrades who never came home. War isn't always bullets. Sometimes it's surviving long enough to be ignored. Dre began helping at the corner store, carrying crates, picking up trash. Once, Wallace found him scrubbing the graffiti off a nearby wall. He said nothing, just nodded, and Dre beamed inside, like a boy catching a rare smile from a stern father. The others, Jamal, Curtis, even Raoul, came around too. Eventually, they didn't become angels overnight. But they slowed down, listened more. Their laughter softened. Less venom, more warmth. Wallace never claimed credit. He just showed up. Every morning, 7:12 a.m., polished boots, cane, newspaper. 3 weeks after the alley, the local community center called. They wanted to host a veterans talk. Wallace was the centerpiece. He refused until Dre stepped in. "You don't have to speak. Just be there. Let people see you." Wallace agreed on one condition. The boys speak first. The event was small, folding chairs, cheap coffee, but packed. Local news showed up. So did neighbors who hadn't left their homes in months. When Dre took the mic, his hands shook. He didn't read a script, didn't fake tears, just stood there and said, "I used to think being strong meant being feared, but now I know it's about how much you can carry and how you carry it." He looked at Wallace. That man carried us, without lifting a finger. The room held its breath, then applause, not the wild kind. The kind that starts slow, builds real, earned. Wallace didn't bow, didn't smile, he just nodded. The next morning, Wallace arrived at his usual bench to find something strange. The plaque, bronze, bolted clean into the wood slats. It hadn't been there yesterday. Someone had worked fast and quietly, etched in clean lettering. He stood still. The world changed. He ran his fingers across it, not to read, but to feel. Like a blind man reading the pressure points of gratitude. No signature, no sponsor, just the truth, left behind like a flag on high ground. Wallace sat, sipped his coffee, didn't react when the shopkeeper gave him a second cup on the house. He just looked down the street where a small crowd was gathering. Not big, a dozen, maybe 15, but growing, and not for a protest, not for a scandal. They were here. To watch him sit. The clip of Dre's speech at the community center had gone viral the night before. This time, not for shock or mockery. This time, the internet listened. He carried us without lifting a finger. That single line, low-resolution, half-lit teenage voice, was enough. Vets across the country began stitching it onto their own videos. On TikTok, on Instagram, in reaction reels, in old photos from deployments. One account showed a dusty photo of a young Wallace, shirtless, bandaged, hoisting another soldier onto a medevac. Captioned, "Gunny carried me too." A city council member reposted the video, then a mayor, then a senator. By noon, the Marine Corps official page issued a statement. Honor is not a uniform. It's a life lived in silence and service. Gunnery. Sergeant James Wallace reminds us that courage doesn't retire. That afternoon, a black SUV pulled up to the corner. Not flashing lights, not government flags, just a clean, discreet vehicle. A man stepped out in dress blues, straight-backed. White gloves. He walked straight to the bench, saluted. "Sir," he said quietly, handing Wallace a box. With the commandant's highest regard, Wallace nodded once, opened the box. Inside, a reinstated service medal long believed lost, and a new one he had never expected. For community valor in peacetime, enclosed was a handwritten letter. Not for what you did in war, but for what you did on a street corner. Wallace closed the box, said nothing. Across the street, Dre watched from behind the bodega door. He didn't film, didn't post, he just watched. And what he saw wasn't just respect. It was a man, unarmed, unflinching, uncelebrated, being honored not because he shouted, but because he didn't need to, because he waited, because he believed something better could come, and because somehow it had. The other boys came too. Raoul wore a pressed shirt. Jamal held a notebook. Curtis looked nervous, like the city might demand repayment for the peace they now carried. They stayed quiet, crossed the street, and stood, not in a line, but a small arc, like satellites finally learning to orbit the right gravity. Wallace looked at them, then stood, his cane steady, his coat still bearing the patch. He stepped toward Dre, slow and deliberate. The boy stiffened, but Wallace didn't shake his hand. Instead, he lifted one arm and saluted. It wasn't military. Not exactly, just acknowledgement, recognition. And Dre's lips trembled. He returned the gesture, not perfectly, but sincerely. That night, the city slept differently. No banners were raised, no parades marched. But in barber shops, people spoke. His name. At dinner tables, parents showed the clip to their kids and said, "This is what strength looks like." In Marine circles, they didn't speak of the alley as a victory. They called it the last drill, the one where no weapons were drawn, only lines, redrawn, between shame and redemption, between youth and manhood, between forgetting and remembering. Wallace didn't change his routine. He still rose at dawn, still walked at 7:12 a.m., but now others walked too, not with him, behind, quietly. Teenagers, veterans, strangers. Some just nodded, some offered him coffee. One girl handed him a drawing, him on his bench surrounded by shadowy Marines like guardian angels. He didn't say thank you, He didn't have to. And somewhere, in another alley, in another city, a boy lifted his phone to record something cruel. But paused, thought, and lowered it again. Because he remembered the look in that old man's eyes, the kind that tells you, you're already being watched. There are places in every city where time slows, corners where stories gather like dust in sunlight, undisturbed, half-remembered. James Wallace's bench became one of those places, not because of fame, not because of a viral clip, but because people began to sit, not just to rest but to reflect, and maybe, if they were lucky, to catch a glimpse of him. By late spring, the city had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The liquor store stopped selling single-shot bottles. The alley, once reeking of urine and broken futures, had been painted over with a mural, a wide canvas in grayscale, Wallace standing firm, 5 silhouettes behind him. Marines, not in battle poses, just there, hands behind backs, eyes steady. Above them, in deep crimson letters, "Strength is how you stand when no one sees you." Painted by a kid from the neighborhood, quiet boy, barely 17. Dre brought him to meet Wallace one morning. The boy didn't speak, just handed him a print copy. Wallace took it like one would a folded flag, gently, with reverence. "Thank you," he said, the first time he had uttered those words in public since the alley. Local schools began requesting him for talks. He declined most. Too old, he'd say, but for one high school Dre's, he made an exception. He didn't walk to the front. He stayed in the back, let Dre speak. The boy stood before his peers, not with a speech, but with a story. "I shoved a man who survived 3 wars, laughed when a car nearly hit him, thought I was untouchable." He paused. And he didn't hit back. He called in men who didn't need fists to show me what respect feels like. He glanced toward the back of the room, where Wallace sat, hands folded on his cane. "He didn't punish me. He gave me something more dangerous, another chance." The silence that followed was thick with realization, and when the room applauded, Wallace did not smile, but his eyes softened. And for him, that was enough. The Marine Corps invited him to Washington. He declined once, twice. The third time, he sent a simple reply, "I've done my service. Let the young ones take the light." But they insisted. And so, one May morning, with Dre helping him pack, Wallace boarded a plane for the first time in over 20 years. At the base gates, 4 Marines waited. One young corporal stepped forward. "Sir, I was raised on your story. My father served under you in '91. Told me if I ever met you to say thank you for dragging him out of a fire zone in Kuwait." Wallace looked at him long and hard, then placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then I'm glad I came." In the Capitol Rotunda, under marble and memory, Wallace received the highest civilian recognition for valor in peacetime. He stood without shaking, spoke without notes, just 10 words. "This isn't for me. It's for every forgotten brother." And sat down again. As he did, the room stood, not with ceremony, with respect. Back home, the bench remained empty for 3 mornings. Then, on the 4th, a new figure appeared at 7:12 a.m. Dre. No camera, no friends, just a folded flag in his hand, and a coat 2 sizes too big. He sat down, looked straight ahead, didn't speak, but when the wind shifted, you could almost hear it, the echo of boots, the quiet breath of duty, the sound of a city learning how to remember. James Wallace passed quietly in his sleep 6 months later. The news said natural causes, but those who knew him said otherwise. He waited till the boys could walk. Without him, he was buried with full honors. The 5 Marines from the alley flew in. So did Dre and dozens of kids from the neighborhood who'd never said a word to him, but sat nearby and watched. The funeral wasn't loud. No marching, band, no flag-draped drama, just taps and silence. And at the very end, as the last note faded, a voice from the crowd whispered, "He didn't need revenge. He gave us something better." And in a quiet corner of a quiet city, the bench still waits. The plaque still gleams. And sometimes someone sits down, back straight, eyes forward, listening for the lesson hidden in the silence, because the world changed and a Marine never truly leaves the field. He just waits for the next recruit. If this story moved you, don't scroll past. Not every battle leaves a scar you can see. Not every hero wears a cape, and not every lesson is taught with fists. James Wallace stood for something deeper: dignity, patience, and the quiet power of doing what's right when no one expects it. Share this story if you believe respect must be earned, but second chances should be given. Tag someone who needs to hear, strength is how you stand when no one sees you. Drop a Semper Fi in the comments to honor all the silent warriors who still carry the weight. For all of us. Don't just watch, remember, and pass it on.